Let's bring in NBC's Yamiche Alcindor from Pittsburgh. Yamiche, Vice President Harris's closing messages, those seem very, very different than what we've seen in the past few days, focusing on things like joy instead of a fight. What's with the 180 here?
That's right. This is really a Harris campaign that has come full circle. It started with joy, and it is now ending with the message of joy. In the middle, you had a lot of aggressive attacks on Donald Trump, talking about, of course, the fact that she believes he's a threat to democracy, that he's someone who would put himself over the country and even the Constitution. But now you see in the last 48 hours, and really in this last 24 hours, the vice president, just yesterday when I was at Michigan State with her, for the first time in a campaign rally, she did not say Trump's by name. She didn't use his name at all. And that really, the campaign tells me, is about her, quote, closing fully positively. So she's really trying to lean in on the idea that she has a vision for America, and she's this new generation of American leaders that people need to have in this country, Gotti.
She's closing with that message, and she's also kind of closing in Pennsylvania. That's her last campaign day there. So what does that tell us?
It's really interesting for the fact that she's in Pennsylvania, and she's really gone around the state to different demographics. She started in Scranton, and then she went to Allentown, Pennsylvania, which has a large Puerto Rican population, which, of course, is still reacting to that Madison Square Garden rally that Trump had, where there were racist jokes calling Puerto Rico an island, a floating island of garbage. Then she's going to be heading here to Pittsburgh. I'm standing right now at a former steel plant, which is where the vice president's going to speak in a few minutes here. And then she's going to go to Philadelphia to close this out, of course, the birthplace of our democracy. I should tell you that the Harris campaign and Democrats are feeling really good about Pennsylvania. I want to read some numbers to you. They say that mail-in ballot returns are at a higher rate this year, 81% in 2024 instead of 78% in 2020. They also see a particular momentum among black voters aged 30 to 49, up 27% compared to last week. And they're also saying that this is a ground game that the Harris campaign has, that they really feel good about it. They say 90,000 volunteers, and they knocked on more than 3 million doors, Gotti.
That's what the campaign's saying. What are Harris supporters telling you out there on the trail?
Well, I've been talking to a lot of people here in Pittsburgh, and they are feeling very excited. They really feel like she has the momentum and the wind at her back. She's been saying that on the campaign trail, that she believes she will win. We also talked to some Puerto Rican voters in Allentown, Pennsylvania, who reacted to that racist joke that was said at the Trump rally. Take a listen to what they said.
My first thoughts were, you never come for Puerto Rico. That's a mistake.
How that was allowed to happen, how no true Puerto Rican didn't get offended from it, because it offended all of us.
It wasn't a blessing by no means. I think it was disgusting what that person said, but it put us on the map.
So it's really interesting. There's been a lot of sort of chaos and scandals around Donald Trump for years, the decade he's been in politics. But this joke, this incident, it's really sticking, and an interesting thing to see, Gotti.
Yamiche Alcindor out there in Pittsburgh for us tonight. Yamiche, thank you. Like we said, our latest and our national NBC News poll is showing Harris and Trump right now neck and neck, each a point higher than last month when the same poll showed them tied at 48%. But when it comes to the gender gap, there's a very different story. We are talking 34 points separating who men and women want in the White House, with female voters supporting Harris by 16 points and male voters supporting Trump by 18 points. And if those numbers hold, it'll be the largest gender gap since 1980, which was Ronald Reagan versus Jimmy Carter. And a new poll out from the New York Times and Siena College gives us a last look at those 7 battleground states, which shows Harris leading or tied in 6 of them. But despite this, Trump told voters today that this is his race to lose.
Hopefully everything will work out well. We're way leading. All we have to do is close it out. We have to close it out. It's ours to lose. Does that make sense to you? It's ours to lose. If we get everybody out and vote, there's not a thing they can do.
And NBC News correspondent Garrett Hake joins us now from Pittsburgh, where Trump is holding his rally, right? So, Garrett, he's headed to Grand Rapids, Michigan later tonight for his last rally. He seems to be running a little bit late there. Pennsylvania and Michigan, Biden won them in 2020. What are Trump's chances this year, then?
Well, Gotti, look, Pennsylvania more so even than Michigan is a state Donald Trump has to get back. His campaign sees his most direct path, the 270 electoral votes, as holding on to North Carolina, which has been the closest battleground state that he won in 2020, flipping back Georgia, a state where he only lost by about 12,000 votes, and winning Pennsylvania, another very close battleground that has seen, his campaign believes, a shift to the right in the 4 years since the last election. Those 3 states alone would get him above 270 electoral votes. Everything else is just a bonus. So appearing in Michigan late tonight is part electoral, necessity in the sense that they would love to win Michigan. It's a competitive state. He spent a lot of time there. But it's also a bit of superstition for Trump. He ended both his 2016 and his 2020 campaigns in Grand Rapids. Remember, to Trump, he believes those are both races he won. So keeping the superstition alive there a little bit with one last late-night rally in Grand Rapids.
And Garrett, in terms of the gender gap, how is the Trump campaign seeing the break in those numbers in those crucial swing states?
Honestly, Gotti, they've never really made much of an attempt to close the gap on the female side. What they've tried to do instead is increase the gap in their favor when it comes to men. That's been Trump's strategy all along in this campaign, appearing on male-focused podcasts and streaming programs, television shows, his high-profile attendance at UFC fights, his relationships with WWE wrestlers. The Trump campaign believes he can win this race in part by turning Trump fans, Trump supporters out there, particularly men and young men, into actual Trump voters. They have geared most of their resources and attention to that strategy over the last year and a half. And tomorrow we're all going to find out if that is a winning strategy or if the gap on the other side, where he struggles significantly with women compared to Kamala Harris, will overwhelm their testosterone firewall, if you will.
And Garrett, playing a little bit of hypothetical in terms of who is headed to the Oval Office with Trump, if he wins, a lot of the old faces we saw in 2016 aren't around anymore, right? He talked about it a little bit earlier today. I think it's pretty important. Take a listen.
I will invoke. We'll do a much better job now because I know the people. Now I know the good ones, the bad ones. I know the weak ones, the strong ones. I know the stupid ones. I know the smart ones. I know them all.
So, Garrett, if Trump were to win, who can Americans expect to see in his new administration?
Well, it'll be interesting to see, Gotti. One name that is certainly high up on the list is probably Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who dropped out of this race and endorsed Trump late. Trump has suggested that he put him in charge of the nation's health system. Whether that means he'd be something like the HHS secretary or in a non-confirmed position like a healthcare czar remains to be seen. I think Kennedy, some of Trump's former rivals like Vivek Ramaswamy are likely to be involved. Also, some other folks we've seen him campaign a great deal with in the race's closing weeks, like former Democrat Tulsi Gabbard could be in the mix. But you make an excellent point. His former vice president, his former chief of staff coming out against him. A lot of his former cabinet members, even some of his family members, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner, who were in the last administration, have said they don't want anything to do with another administration for various reasons. So the vetting and the installation of a second Trump administration would be something I would be covering very closely from my perch on Capitol Hill, because getting folks confirmed, depending on what happens in the Senate, could also be a challenge if Trump wants to try to install loyalists in some of those cabinet posts that require Senate votes.
Garrett Haake out there with Trump in Pittsburgh tonight. Garrett, thank you. And let's turn now to Nevada, a battleground in the West where more than 1 million people have already voted. And even though the state has voted blue in every presidential election since 2008, it has always been close. And these margins amounting to about 30,000 votes, both in 2016 and 2020. And this year could be no different. In the latest New York Times CNN poll, Harris leads Trump by 3 points, which is in the margin of error. So let's bring in NBC News correspondent David Noriega. David, 1 million votes already sent in. Any insight into which way they could tilt the scale and what's influencing any last-minute strategy there?
Yeah, Gotti. So first, one thing that's special about Nevada is that in most swing states, they caution you against reading into the early voting numbers too much, right? But Nevada is kind of the exception because historically, a large proportion of all of the votes that are cast in this state are cast early, up to 80% in some past election cycles. So it is actually possible to read at least a little bit into those numbers. And so far, surprisingly, the Republicans are ahead of the Democrats in the early vote by more than 40,000 votes, so larger than that margin by which the Dems won this state in the last election cycle by about 4 percentage points so far. Now, that doesn't mean that the Republicans are going to win, of course, but it does mean that the Democrats are in the unprecedented position of having to scramble to get out the vote in the last, 48, 24 hours of during which people can still vote to close that gap with the Republicans. That means that the Democrats are working very, very, very hard to turn out the vote, particularly turn out the vote in what is historically their base here in Las Vegas, the most populous county in the state, Clark County. That means working class, Latino, and other people of color, people who work in the casinos, the resorts. A lot of them are Latino, as you know, Gotti, and they have been sending canvassers to knock on 20,000 doors a day. They have musical acts at this event that I'm at here tonight that are specifically geared towards that demographic. For example, tonight, Los Tigres del Norte are playing. They are a legendary northern Mexican band that's been making music for more than 40 years, won multiple Grammys. They speak directly to that Mexican-American demographic, and their goal is to try and get those people, particularly the men, to go out and vote for Kamala Harris. I actually got a chance to catch up with some of the guys from Los Tigres in their dressing room earlier. I asked them whether they think their concert here tonight and their efforts to get out the vote are going to make a difference. Take a listen to what one of them said.
We won Nevada and we won Arizona. The past election with Biden,
I think
we
it's
didn't
stopping
get
after this.
the states that we went and root the Democrats, and for us it's very important, not only with our voices, but when we go on stage and sing and play our music and we send that message through our music, I think is when they get identified and they remember where they're coming from.
Gotti, Trump has made inroads with Latino voters over the course of the last couple of years, especially Latino men. Those are the losses, the erosion that the Dems are working very hard to shore up right now. They have a lot going in their favor. A legendary turnout ground game machine here in Las Vegas. Acts like Los Tigres, other celebrity endorsements. We don't know yet and will not know until later this week whether that's enough to keep Nevada blue or whether Trump will be able to build enough of a diverse coalition to flip this state.
David Noriega with Los Tigres del Norte in a suit and tie, not something you see every day. David, thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.